Good morning, everyone. My name is Ariana del Rosario. I am the Product Portfolio Manager for Fraud and Authentication. I'm very pleased to be here today with you, and today we're going to talk a bit about PSD2. We have very interesting topics. First, we're going to talk about what is to expect or what we should expect after December 31st, 2020. Then we're going to talk about what is really PSD2, what is 3D Secure, what are the protocols, what is our offer. Then we're going to talk a bit about exemptions that are possible with the 3D Secure version 2. And then last, we're going to talk about our recommendation moving forward with this topic. So the first thing that we want to talk about is what should we expect after December 31st. So December 31st is the deadline for PSD2 for merchants to become compliant and apply strong customer authentication. So after December 31st, we're going to see issuers and acquirers reinforcing strong customer authentication for those transactions that are in the scope. So the issuers are going to start soft declining those transactions, and basically what that means is the transaction will be soft decline, and we are going to have the opportunity to step up that transaction, meaning that we need to resubmitting using strong customer authentication, and if we don't, that transaction is going to be hard decline, meaning that the issuer is not going to authorize that transaction. I think that the impact there is really clear for merchants, but let's see what transactions are in the scope or what transactions should be taken care of. And then we want to talk about what is PSD2. So PSD2, in 1 second. So PSD2 is basically an European regulation, and that regulation, there we go. And that European regulation means that all the transactions that are performed in an European market, let's say European acquirer and an European issuer, should be authenticated using strong customer authentication. So really it doesn't matter where the merchant is located, but it does matter where the issuer and the acquirer are. So transactions that are actually performed or acquired by the European acquirer and cards that are issued by an European issuer are in the scope of PSD2. Now, PSD2 introduces strong customer authentication, and when we say strong customer authentication, we are referring to authenticating the identity of the cardholder by something that he can, or possibly only he knows how to authenticate, meaning that he has to provide information regarding something that he knows, something that he is, or something that he possesses. Strong customer authentication is something that PSD2 is required. But actually, how do we know how to do it? So then that's when the schemes put into place 3D Secure. And 3D Secure is the protocol for us to do or perform strong customer authentication. Until 2018, 3D Secure version 1 was the only available standard or way to authenticate transactions for electronic payments, and then after 2018, then 3D Secure version 2 came into place. The main difference between those two is that 3D Secure version 1 automatically requested a challenge from the cardholder, so it did require the cardholder to put information there that was sent then to the schemes, and 3D Secure version 2 adds the frictionless flow, so most of the times the transactions are being authenticated in the back without the cardholder even noticing that that is happening. Also, we have exemptions. It is mobile friendly, so basically it is future proof. In this coming slide, I have a flow, a nice flow, in which we can see the difference between those two. So in 3D Secure version 2, then we have first, if the transaction is possible to be exempted, meaning that to skip strong customer authentication can be granted by the issuer. If that's the case, then we go directly to authorization. In the case that no exemption is possible, then we go for a frictionless flow, meaning that all the authentication will be done in the back without the cardholder knowing that that is going on. And if that is possible, then we go for it. And then if it's not possible, then as the last resource, we will go for a challenge, meaning that the cardholder has to provide information. In the 3D Secure version 1 protocol, only the challenge flow was possible. Then I want to talk a bit about our offer. So our wonderful team has put in place what we call the Accelerator Suite. And basically the Accelerator Suite has many components, let's say. First, we have the automatic fallback. Well, actually, we have the automatic collecting of data, and basically what we do is most of the time, if the merchant is using one of our hosted solutions, then we can collect all the data that is necessary to perform 3D Secure on their behalf. We also have the automatic fallback to 3DV1, and that means that for those transactions that go into a 3DV2 flow that for some reason cannot be completed, meaning that there is a technical error, or that the data is incomplete, or that the issuer is not available, then we will fall back to 3DV1. And most of the times we do recover. In fact, we do recover around 16% of those transactions that cannot be completed to 3DV2. Then we have the automatic step up, and the automatic step up happens when the issuer soft declines the transaction, meaning that that transaction is in the scope of PSD2 and is not authenticated. So the issuer soft declines the transaction, and then we do an automatic step up, meaning that we do either using 3DV2 or 3DV1, we do authenticate the transaction. Then we also have the Smart Comply model, and in that Smart Comply model, what we do is on behalf of the merchants, we select those transactions that need to be authenticated, and if they do need to be authenticated, then we send it for the 3D Secure flow. Also, we have the Dynamic 3D, and in that Dynamic 3D, the merchant can do also that. They can select those transactions that will be sent for authentication, and they will do, and those transactions that are not in the scope, that don't need to go through that flow, they can go directly to authorization. And last but not least, we have the Auto Extend model, and that model basically allows us to select the best exemption possible for you, and we will flag those transactions on your behalf. At the moment, we only have this model available for low-value payment, but in the future, as the acquirers become more ready, we're going to add the rest of the exemptions. Now that we talk about exemptions, that's the next topic. So exemptions are a way that are only possible in the 3D Secure version 2 flow. And exemptions are basically the merchant requesting the issuer to skip strong customer authentication. The first exemption that is possible is called the low value payment exemption, or LVP. And in that exemption, if the amount of the purchase is less than 30 euros, or up to 5 consecutive transactions, or up to 100 euros, then the merchant can request or flag the transaction to request the exemption. It is important to keep in mind that exemptions are requested by the merchant, but are only granted by the issuer. If the issuer decides that transaction could be exempted, then the liability shifts back to the merchant, meaning that the merchant will be responsible for that transaction in case that there is any fraud. So saying that, the second exemption that we have is transaction risk analysis, or TRA, and it also depends on the fraud level of the acquirer. So if the fraud level of the acquirer is low, or low enough depending on the different tiers that they're set by the schemes, then the merchant or the acquirer can request this exemption up to 500 euros, depending, as I said, on the tier that the fraud rate is for the acquirer. And if it's granted as well, the liability will shift to the merchant. It actually requires also an agreement between the merchant and the acquirer, because actually the acquirer will flag those transactions on behalf of the merchant. Then we have whitelisting. Whitelisting is a exemption in which the merchant requested to the issuer to be added to the trusted beneficiary list, and if it is so, then the merchant can request the cardholder to mark him as a whitelisted merchant, so the merchant can flag the transaction directly. It is important that we don't know when this happens, so if the merchant knows that he has been added to this list, he can request directly to the cardholder to flag it or to add it to the whitelist with the issuer. Then the last one, not the last one, but the next exemption is the secure corporate payments, and this exemption is when, for example, transactions are made with using a corporate card, let's say for bookings or hotel reservations or flight reservations. In that case, then also the merchant can request to be exempted. It is important to know that we as a PSP cannot identify these kind of transactions, but the merchant can do it, especially because some of those are made through booking agencies, so or travel agencies, so they can also flag those transactions to be exempted, to skip strong customer authentication. And the last exemption that is not really an exemption but is treated as such is called delegated authentication. And delegated authentication is when the merchant requests to the schemes to use a specific platform or a system to authenticate the transactions themselves. So in that case, the merchant is responsible to authenticate the transactions and send those values to the issuers, and of course they are also responsible for the fraud in case there is any. Important to mention that the exemptions are requested by the merchant or by the acquirer, but are only granted by the issuer. So there is no guarantee that the exemptions will be granted when they are requested. Last, I want to talk a bit about our recommendation for become compliant. The first thing is that we need you to be aware of the flags that you need to make, and you need to flag those transactions correctly. For example, if you have customer-initiated transactions, or if you have merchant-initiated transactions, recurring payment, it is important that you flag them correctly, because some of those transactions might be out of the scope, for example, for the Moto transactions, or some will need specific values in the message. Then it is important also to provide a return URL. And a return URL is important because when we do a step up, or we authenticate or request an authentication on your behalf, we need to send back the cardholder to a web page. And that web page is the web page in which the payment is taking place. So if we don't have that return URL, basically the cardholder is going to be stuck in a place in which he cannot go back to the web page where he was making the order. Please submit all the mandatory and recommended fields, because it will guarantee that the transaction will go through, and if the authentication is required, it will take place. Always authenticate for the maximum amount possible. The reason why we recommend this is because, for example, in the case of hotels, when you authenticate the transaction the first time, if you authenticate it for 200 euros and then the transaction turns out to be 300 euros, then you're going to have to authenticate for the difference amount. But if you authenticate for the maximum amount possible, you will only have to authenticate the transaction once. And then last but not least, please take a look at the exemptions. Plan your exemption strategy, and please reach out to us because we are here to help you. Thank you very much. I hope this information was useful to you. We have all this information in our webpage. There are also implementation guides and very interesting white papers that will help you, and reach out to us at any point. Thank you very much. Question? If you have any question, please, you can feel free to write them in the chat. I'll be here to answer them. Also, take a look at the presentation that is there, and just feel free. I'm here just to answer them all. Thank you. Yes, there is a question, a very interesting question in the chat. It is what happens after December 31st if we have transactions that are not authenticated and should be? And the answer is yes, they will be declined. So at the beginning, it will be soft decline, meaning that the issuer will send us a message saying this transaction needs to be authenticated, please resubmit. And then we have the opportunity to resubmit this transaction using a strong customer authentication. If that transaction is not resubmitted, then it will become a hard decline, meaning that the issuer will not authorize that transaction. So it is important to, and that's the reason why we recommend we can use it in any of the services that we have. We have the Smart Comply model, and we also have the Dynamic 3D. And those will automatically let you or allow you to mark those transactions that are compliant, that are on the scope, let's say, and that needs to be authenticated. But yes, expect after December 31st an increase in the decline rate because the transactions need to be authenticated, and in case they're not, they will be declined. Thank you.